Some families are born, others are forged through fire, tested by doubt and proven by time. The Kang family? They were all three. Hey everyone, welcome back to Silence Speaks Story. If you're just joining us, you're stepping into the final chapter of a journey that started with a fearless 10-month-old baby who crawled toward the most dangerous man in Seoul and changed his life forever. Before we dive into this conclusion, make sure you've watched parts 1 and 2 because this story builds on everything that came before. Part 1 showed us how Rochelle and baby Natasha entered Taeho's world and cracked open the Steel King's frozen heart. Part 2 took us through the custody battle when Natasha's biological father, Marcus, tried to tear their family apart for money. Now, in Part 3, we're jumping forward to see what happened after the dust settled. And if you love these deep, emotional stories about families that choose each other against all odds, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Even better, join our membership for exclusive content, early access, and behind-the-scenes story breakdowns. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now, let me set the scene. It's been 5 years since the courthouse. Natasha is 15 now, a teenager navigating high school, identity, and the complex reality of being Tae-ho Kang's daughter. But she's not an only child anymore. Tae-ho and Rochelle had a son together, 3-year-old Elijah Kang, the biological child who's supposed to make everything feel complete. Except Natasha's starting to wonder, does having a real Kang change how her father sees her? Does blood matter more when you finally have it? And when a school project forces her to explore her family tree, Natasha's about to discover that being chosen doesn't mean the questions ever fully go away. This is the final chapter, the one where we find out if chosen family can survive the ultimate test: time, biology, and a teenager's need to know where she truly belongs. Let's begin. The assignment should have been simple. Trace your family back 3 generations, Ms. Park announced to the class, handing out project guidelines. Explore your cultural heritage. Understand your roots. This is worth 20% of your grade. Around Natasha, students were already pulling out phones, texting parents for information. Easy, straightforward, the kind of assignment you could knock out in a weekend. Natasha stared at the rubric and felt her stomach knot. What was she supposed to put? The Kang family tree? The one she'd been legally grafted into 10 years ago? Her mother's Cameroonian heritage that Rochelle had left behind and rarely spoke about? Or the biological reality of Marcus Obi, a man whose DNA she carried, but whose existence she'd spent 5 years pretending didn't matter. Any questions? Ms. Park asked. Natasha kept her head down. No questions. Just the same complicated truth she'd been navigating since she was 10 years old. Her family didn't fit into neat boxes on a genealogy chart. That evening, at dinner, she mentioned the assignment casually, keeping her tone light. We have to do a family tree project for history, 3 generations back. Tae-ho looked up from cutting Elijah's food. The Kang family records go back centuries. I can help you access the archives. And I can tell you about Cameroon, Rochelle added, smiling. About your grandparents, the village where I grew up. You've never asked much about that side. Because asking felt like admitting she didn't fully belong to the family sitting at this table. I'm a Kang, 3-year-old Elijah announced, banging his spoon for emphasis. Right, Daddy? That's right. Tae-ho ruffled his son's hair, and something in Natasha's chest tightened. Elijah didn't have to prove he was a Kang, didn't have to choose between heritage and adoption, between biology and love. He just was, born into certainty while Natasha had been chosen into it, which should feel special, should feel enough. So why didn't it? Tasha? Rochelle was watching her with that careful attention mothers develop when they sense something wrong. You okay? Yeah, fine. Just thinking about how to organize it all. Thanks for offering to help. Later, in her room, she pulled up the assignment requirements again. There was a section asking students to reflect on how their heritage shaped their identity. Natasha's pen hovered over the blank page. She was legally Natasha Kang, culturally disconnected from Cameroon, biologically tied to a man she'd rejected in a courtroom, raised by a former crime lord who'd taught her chess and how to negotiate, and that love was a choice you made every single day. How exactly was she supposed to put that into a family tree? Down the hall, she could hear Tae-ho reading Elijah a bedtime story, her little brothers giggling punctuating their father's deep voice. The same voice that had read to her for years, the same patience, the same love. But Elijah would never have to explain why he belonged. He'd never have to defend his last name, or justify his place at the table, or wonder if having a biological son changed how their father measured love. Natasha closed her laptop and stared at the ceiling. She was 15 years old, legally adopted, completely loved. So why did a simple school assignment make her feel like a fraud? Natasha loved her little brother. That wasn't the issue. Elijah was sweet, funny, fearless in that way she recognized because she'd been the same at his age. He had Rochelle's smile and that stubborn set to his jaw that was pure Tae-ho. When he ran through the house with his toy cars, making explosion sounds that echoed off marble floors, Natasha felt genuine affection. But watching Tae-ho with him surfaced feelings she didn't want to examine. It happened during little moments, like Tuesday afternoon, when Elijah came running from preschool and launched himself at Tae-ho without hesitation. Their father scooped him up in one smooth motion, and Elijah wrapped his arms around Tae-ho's neck like he'd never doubted he'd be caught. Natasha watched from the stairs, remembering when she used to do the same thing. Tae-ho had always caught her too, always would. But the small, cruel voice in her head whispered, "Is it different now? Does it feel different to him because Elijah is actually his blood?" She hated that voice, hated herself for listening to it. At dinner that night, one of Tae-ho's business associates stopped by with his family. The man's wife took one look at Elijah and beamed. "Oh, he has your eyes, doesn't he, honey?" Same serious expression. Elijah didn't have Tae-ho's eyes, not really, but people saw what they expected to see when biology was involved. Nobody had ever said Natasha had Tae-ho's anything, because she didn't, couldn't. And that had never bothered her before, so why did it sting now? The associate's daughter, maybe 7 years old, looked at Natasha curiously. "Are you adopted?" The adults went silent, that particular kind of silence that meant everyone was pretending they hadn't heard while desperately hoping someone else would answer. "Yes," Natasha said simply, because she was. Because there was no shame in it, because Tae-ho had taught her that chosen family was just as real as biological family. So why did the little girl's next question feel like a knife? "Do you wish you were really his daughter?" "She is really my daughter." Tae-ho's voice cut through the awkwardness like steel. Not angry, just absolutely certain. He looked at the associate's wife, then at Natasha. Biology is one way to build a family, but it's not the only way, and it's not the most important way. The moment passed. Conversation moved on, but Natasha caught the little girl whispering to her mother later, "But the boy is his real son, right?" That night, Natasha stood in Elijah's doorway watching Tae-ho tuck him in. The routine was familiar, same stories, same gentle voice, same kiss on the forehead. The same way he'd tucked her in for 15 years. But when Elijah reached up and touched Tae-ho's face with those chubby 3-year-old hands, saying, "Love you, Daddy," with absolute certainty, Natasha felt something twist in her chest. Elijah would never be asked if he wished he was really Tae-ho's son, would never have to defend his place, would never wonder if a school project about family trees was a minefield. He just belonged, automatically, completely, without question. And Natasha, who'd been chosen, who'd been fought for in a courtroom, who'd been legally made a king, couldn't shake the feeling that chosen would always be second to born. She went to her room before Tae-ho could see her watching, before he could see the doubt she was ashamed to feel. Natasha woke up thirsty at 11:30 p.m., her throat dry from the heater running in her room. The house was quiet as she padded down the hallway in bare feet, the marble cool against her skin. Most of the lights were off except for the soft glow coming from under Tejo's office door. She was halfway to the kitchen when she heard voices. Want to make absolutely certain there's no ambiguity in the language. That was Tejo, and the responding voice belonged to Mr. Kim, their family lawyer. Natasha knew she should keep walking, knew that eavesdropping never ended well, but something in Tejo's cown, careful, protective, made her feet stop moving. The inheritance provisions need to be ironclad, Mr. Kim was saying, especially with biological children and adopted children in the same estate. Biological children, adopted children. Two categories, two different things that lawyers had to work to make legally the same. Is Natasha protected equally? Rochelle's voice now, sharp with concern. Legally, yes. The adoption finalized 10 years ago gives her identical status to any biological child. But I'm recommending we add specific language that explicitly states equal division regardless of... Regardless of what? Tejo's voice had gone cold. Regardless of biological relation to you, sir. It's just protective language, in case anyone ever challenges. No one will challenge anything. Steel wrapped in certainty. Natasha is my daughter, period. She gets exactly what Elijah gets, no distinction, no special clauses, nothing that suggests she's anything other than my child. Of course, Mr. Kang, I'm simply ensuring the paperwork reflects that unambiguously. Sometimes family members contest wills, and my family won't contest anything because they know exactly where I stand. A pause. Make the language clear. Natasha and Elijah are equal in every legal sense. No room for interpretation. Understood. I'll draft the revisions tonight. Natasha should have felt relieved, should have felt protected by Tejo's fierce certainty. Instead, she fixated on 3 words, legally identical status. Why did the law have to specify? Why did there need to be protective language to make her equal? Why were there categories at all, biological children and adopted children, if it didn't matter? She made it to the kitchen, got her water, and went back to bed without being seen. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept replaying Mr. Kim's careful phrasing. Biological children, adopted children. 2 different things that lawyers had to work to make legally the same. Tejo had been adamant that she was equal to Elijah. He believed that, but belief wasn't the same as reality, was it? The law had to create equality for her. Elijah got it automatically. Natasha stared at her ceiling, the doubt that had been growing since the family tree assignment now spreading like cracks in ice. She was protected, provided for, legally identical. But legally identical implied that naturally, inherently, she wasn't. That without paperwork and protective clauses and careful language, she'd be different. Less. Other. And maybe, in ways that mattered, she always would be. The distance started small. On Wednesday, Natasha had calculus homework she couldn't figure out. Normally, she'd take it to Tejo's office, where he'd walk her through the problem with the same patient precision he used for business negotiations. This time, she stayed in her room and figured it out herself. It took 3 hours and 2 YouTube videos, but she got it done. Thursday was family movie night. They'd been doing it every week since Elijah was born. Popcorn, blankets piled on the sectional, Tejo letting Elijah pick something animated while Natasha pretended to complain but secretly enjoyed it. "Tasha," Elijah called from downstairs. "Movie time! I picked Moana." "I have a test to study for," she called back. "You guys go ahead." She didn't have a test. She sat on her bed listening to the sounds of her family laughing downstairs, testing whether they'd pause the movie and come get her. They didn't, respected her space like she'd asked. It felt like failure.
Friday, Taeho asked if she wanted to accompany him to a business dinner. He'd been bringing her occasionally since she was 12, teaching her how to read rooms and negotiate with silence. "I'm meeting friends," Natasha lied. She saw something flicker in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or concern, but he just nodded. "Have fun. Text me if you need a ride." By Saturday, Rochelle was clearly worried. She appeared in Natasha's doorway with that careful mother expression that meant she was choosing her words. "Everything okay, baby?" "Fine, just busy with school." "You've been spending a lot of time alone lately." "I'm 15. That's normal, isn't it?" Natasha didn't look up from her phone. Rochelle lingered another moment, then left quietly. That hurt too. Why didn't she push? Why didn't anyone fight to keep her close? The answer came Sunday afternoon in the kitchen where Natasha was making tea and pretending she wasn't listening to Taeho and Rochelle talk in the next room. "She's pulling away," Taeho said quietly. "I've noticed. Should I—" He stopped. "Is this normal teenage stuff, or is something wrong?" "I think she needs space to figure herself out. 15 is complicated." "She's barely speaking to me." "Give her time. She knows we're here." But that was exactly the problem, Natasha thought, her hands shaking as she poured water. They were giving her space, being patient, respecting her boundaries. What if she needed them to not respect boundaries? What if she needed them to break down her door and demand to know what was wrong and refuse to let her hide? What if she was testing them and they were failing by being understanding? Later, Mrs. Chen found her sitting on the back steps, staring at nothing. The old housekeeper sat down with a grunt, her knees protesting. "You're punishing them for something they didn't do." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Mrs. Chen's voice was matter-of-fact. "You're pulling away to see if they'll pull you back, testing whether you matter as much as you think you do." Natasha's throat tightened. "That's not—" "It is. And here's the thing, child. They're respecting you enough to give you space. That's not abandonment. That's trust." Mrs. Chen stood slowly. "But keep pushing, and eventually everyone gets tired of being pushed." She walked away, leaving Natasha alone with the question she couldn't answer. What did she actually want them to do? It happened at Han River Park on a Sunday afternoon. The weather was perfect. Warm sun, cool breeze, families everywhere. Taeho had suggested the outing, and for once, Natasha had agreed to come instead of finding an excuse to stay home. She told herself it was for Elijah, who'd been asking her to play with him all week, not because she missed her family, not because the distance she'd created was starting to feel more like isolation than independence. Elijah was in his element, running between the playground equipment with boundless energy. Rochelle sat on a bench with Natasha, both watching Taeho chase their 3-year-old brother in circles. "He's good with him," Natasha said before she could stop herself. "He's good with you, too," Rochelle said quietly. "Always has been." Natasha didn't respond, couldn't explain that good with her felt different now, felt like obligation and choice rather than instinct and blood. That's when it happened. Elijah, distracted by a bird, wandered too close to the pond's edge. The embankment was gradual, safe enough, but the water was deeper than it looked. One second, Elijah was standing on the grass. The next, his foot slipped on wet rocks. Taeho moved faster than Natasha had ever seen him move. He crossed 30 feet in seconds, grabbed Elijah by the back of his shirt and yanked him away from the water before he could fall in. The fear on Taeho's face was visceral, raw, the kind of terror that came from somewhere primal and uncontrollable. He dropped to his knees, pulled Elijah against his chest and held him there, just held him. His hands were shaking. "You're okay," Taeho whispered into Elijah's hair. "You're safe. You're okay." Elijah, who'd barely registered the danger, squirmed. "Daddy, I'm fine." But Taeho didn't let go, not for a full minute. And when he finally did, his hands were still trembling as he checked Elijah over, made sure he was unharmed. Natasha watched from the bench, 20 feet away, forgotten in the crisis. And something inside her shattered. She remembered the mansion attack when she was 10, remembered Tejo shielding her body with his, bullets tearing through walls, his arms wrapped around her like armor, remembered him holding her afterward with that same raw fear. The same. It had been exactly the same. But watching him with Elijah now, she couldn't shake the thought that poisoned everything. Is the fear different when it's your biological child? Does the relief go deeper? Does it matter more when they share your blood? The rest of the afternoon blurred. They had lunch. Elijah recovered instantly, already asking to go back to the playground. Tejo kept him closer this time, watchful. Nobody seemed to notice that Natasha had gone completely silent. At dinner that night, it finally erupted. "You've barely said 3 words all evening," Tejo observed, his tone careful. "Did something happen at the park?" Natasha pushed food around her plate, said nothing. "Natasha," firmer now, "talk to me." "Why?" The word came out sharp. "Why do you care?" Teiko's fork stopped. "What kind of question is that?" "You have a real son now." Natasha's voice was rising, 15 years of certainty cracking open. "You don't need the project you took on when I was a baby, the charity case, the girl you felt obligated to protect because her biological father was trash." The silence that followed was deafening. Rochelle's hand covered her mouth. Elijah looked between them, confused. Teiko's face went completely blank, that controlled emptiness he used when he'd been hurt, but refused to show it. "Is that what you think? That you're a project?" Natasha stood up, chair scraping. "I don't know what I think anymore." She left before the tears could fall, before she could see the devastation in her father's eyes, before she could take back the words that had finally made the invisible doubt visible. Natasha waited in her room for the inevitable confrontation. She'd thrown a grenade into their carefully maintained peace. Surely Tejo would come, would knock on her door, demand they talk this through, refuse to let her hide from what she'd said. She waited. An hour passed, then 2. Nobody came. The silence felt like confirmation. If she really mattered, wouldn't he fight harder? Wouldn't he refuse to accept her pushing him away? What Natasha didn't see, Tejo sitting in his office with his head in his hands, looking more defeated than he had facing armed rivals. "I don't understand," he said to Rochelle, his voice raw. "I've loved her the same since she was 10 months old, every single day. How does she not know that?" Rochelle sat beside him, her own heart breaking. "She knows it here," she touched his head, "but maybe not here." Her hand moved to her chest. "There's a difference between knowing you're loved and feeling like you belong. She belongs. She's mine. She's always been mine." She's also 15 and watching you parent a biological child for the first time. Maybe she needs to hear things we've always assumed were obvious. What things? That I love her? That biology doesn't matter? I've shown her that for 15 years. Showing and saying are different. Rochelle took his hand. Maybe she needs the words, even if the actions have always been there. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen found Elijah sitting on the bottom steps, his small face worried. "Is Tasha mad at Daddy?" "No, little one. She's just confused about some big feelings." Daddy looked sad. "He is sad, but not angry. Never angry." Elijah thought about this seriously. "Should I share my crackers with him? That makes me feel better when I'm sad." Mrs. Chen smiled despite everything. "That's very kind, but I think Daddy needs something else right now." "What?" "Time, and his big daughter to remember how much he loves her." In her room, Natasha finally moved from her bed to her desk, mechanically starting on homework she didn't care about, anything to avoid thinking about the look on Tejo's face when she'd called herself a project.
She'd meant to hurt him, had wanted to see if he'd feel pain at the possibility of losing her. Now that she'd succeeded, she felt hollow instead of validated. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rochelle. "We love you. When you're ready to talk, we're here. No pressure, just love." Not from Tejo, from her mother, speaking for both of them. Natasha threw her phone across the room. That night, she couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., she crept out of her room and down the hallway, intending to get water. She passed Tejo's office. The light was still on. Through the crack in the door, she saw him at his desk, but he wasn't working. He was just sitting there, staring at a photograph she couldn't quite see from her angle. His shoulders were slumped in a way she'd never seen. The Steel King, who'd faced down crime lords and prosecutors and assassination attempts, looked utterly defeated. By her. By 15 words spoken in anger. Natasha wanted to go in, wanted to apologize, to take it back, to tell him she didn't mean it. But shame kept her frozen. She'd spent 2 weeks testing whether she mattered, pulling away to see if anyone would pull her back, creating distance to measure love. Now she had her answer. They'd given her space because they trusted her, respected her enough to let her work through whatever she was feeling. And she'd mistaken trust for indifference. Natasha went back to her room without getting water, her throat tight with unshed tears and regret she didn't know how to fix.
Natasha avoided her family for 2 more days, eating breakfast early and staying late at school, shame making her a coward. Wednesday afternoon, she needed to print her family tree project, the one she'd finally finished by focusing only on the Kang lineage and conveniently leaving out any complicated questions about belonging. The printer in her room was out of ink. Tejo's office had the good one. She waited until she heard his car leave for a meeting, then slipped inside. The office smelled like his cologne and old books. Familiar. Safe. A room she'd spent countless hours in, doing homework at the small table while he worked, both of them comfortable in shared silence. Natasha pushed the memories away and headed for the printer. That's when she knocked over the box. It had been on the top shelf, tucked behind reference books. When it fell, the lid came off and papers scattered everywhere across the hardwood floor. "Damn it," Natasha muttered, dropping to her knees to gather everything. Then she saw the label on the folder. Natasha, personal. Her hands froze. She shouldn't look. It was private, clearly meant to be stored away, not displayed. She opened it anyway. The first thing she found was a drawing, crayon on construction paper, crude stick figures labeled "Me and Daddy" in 5-year-old handwriting. Behind it, another drawing, then another. Every single piece of art she'd ever made him, organized chronologically, some of them 15 years old and faded. Report cards, all of them, even the one from 3rd grade where she'd gotten a C in math and had been so ashamed she'd tried to hide it. Tejo's handwriting in the margin. We all struggle sometimes, proud of her for trying. Certificates from activities she'd quit after 2 weeks, ribbons from school sports days where she'd placed last, movie ticket stubs from father-daughter outings she'd barely remembered. Everything. He'd kept everything. Then she found the legal documents, copies of her adoption papers, but these had notes in the margins. Tejo's meticulous handwriting detailing exactly how he wanted her protected. Questions for the lawyers about ensuring she had every right a biological child would have. Concerns about anyone ever challenging her status. The notes were dated over months. He'd spent months making sure the paperwork was perfect. Her hands were shaking now. Medical records going back 15 years. Tejo listed as father on every single one. Consent forms he'd signed for field trips, school registrations, emergency contacts. Years and years of documentation that said, "This is my daughter." Letters. Dozens of them, handwritten on his personal stationery, addressed to her but never sent. Natasha opened one at random, dated from 8 years ago. "Natasha, you lost your first tooth today.
You were so proud showing everyone, and I realized I've been a father for 7 years. 7 years of watching you grow, and I still can't believe you chose me that day in the hallway. You were braver at 10 months old than I'd been my entire life. I hope I'm doing this right. I hope when you're older, you'll understand how much you changed me, how you saved me from being steel forever. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. Dad. The tears came before she could stop them. Another letter from 3 years ago. Today you asked why you don't look like me. I told you families come in all kinds, that love matters more than matching faces. But I saw the doubt in your eyes. Natasha, if I could give you anything, I'd give you certainty, the absolute knowledge that you are mine in every way that matters. Not legally, not biologically, actually. Dad. At the bottom of the box was a single photograph. Natasha, 10 months old, mid-crawl in that hallway. The image slightly blurred from movement. In the background, Tae-ho was crouched down, his hand reaching toward her. She flipped it over. In Tae-ho's handwriting, dated 15 years ago. The day my life began. Natasha found him past midnight. She'd been sitting on the floor of his office for hours, surrounded by 15 years of evidence that she'd never been a project, never been second, never been anything but completely, wholly loved. She knew he was home, had heard his car pull in around 11, knew he'd checked on Elijah because she heard the creak of the nursery door, knew he'd probably looked in on her too, seen her empty bed and assumed she was avoiding him again. She found him in the living room, sitting in the dark. Elijah was asleep on his chest, small body rising and falling with deep breaths. Tae-ho looked exhausted, older than she'd ever seen him. Dad? Her voice came out smaller than intended. She hadn't called him that in 2 weeks. Tae-ho's eyes opened. In the dim light from the hallway, she could see the evidence of sleepless nights on his face. "You're up late," he said quietly, careful not to wake Elijah. "I found your box in your office. I didn't mean to. I was looking for the printer and—" Her voice cracked. I read the letters. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, something more vulnerable. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for what I said at dinner, for pulling away, for testing you like you needed to prove something you've been proving for 15 years. Tae-ho carefully stood, settling Elijah on the couch with a blanket, then turned to face her fully. "Sit with me." They sat on opposite ends of the couch, her brother sleeping peacefully between them. "Tell me everything," Tae-ho said. "All of it. What made you doubt?" So she did. The family tree project that made her feel fraudulent, watching him with Elijah and wondering if biology created a different kind of love, the overheard conversation about biological children versus adopted children, the little girl who'd asked if she wished she was her real daughter, the panic at the park that looked the same but felt different through the lens of her insecurity. "I know it's not rational," Natasha said, tears streaming freely now. "I know you've never treated me differently, but having Elijah made me realize he'll never have to prove he belongs. He just does, automatically. And I started wondering if maybe, deep down, that matters to you, even if you don't want it to." Tae-ho listened without interrupting, his face unreadable in that way that used to terrify rivals, but now just meant he was processing deeply. When she finally fell silent, he spoke. "When you crawled toward me 15 years ago, I had nothing in my life worth protecting." His voice was rough with emotion. "I was steel because there was nothing soft left to defend, no vulnerability, no love. Nothing that could be used against me." He looked at Elijah, then back at her. You changed that. Not Elijah. You. You were first. You taught me how to be a father before I even understood what that meant. You showed me that being chosen could matter more than being born, that love could exist without obligation or biology or any logical reason. But Elijah is my biological son, and I love him completely. Teho's eyes met hers. But, Natasha, you're the child who saved me. You crawled toward a man everyone feared and decided I was worth trusting. Do you understand how rare that is? How precious? I was a baby. I didn't know. Exactly. You didn't know you were supposed to be afraid. You just saw me. His voice broke slightly. And you've been seeing me, really seeing me, ever since. The custody battle, when you stood in that courtroom and chose me, that wasn't obligation. That was you, at 10 years old, understanding what family really means. Natasha wiped her eyes. I saw the notes, on the adoption papers. You spent months making sure I was protected. I spent months terrified I'd fail you. Teho leaned forward. Every parent worries they're not enough, but with you, I had an extra layer. What if you grew up and regretted choosing me? What if you looked back and wished Marcus had stayed? What if biology mattered more than I wanted to believe? It doesn't. I know that now, but 15 years ago, I was learning. And Natasha, I'm still learning, still figuring out how to be the father you deserve. He paused. But here's what I know for certain. You are not a project. You're not second to Elijah. You're not defined by paperwork or legal protections or anything except this. You're my daughter, the first person who taught me what that word meant. Natasha moved closer, and Teho pulled her into his arms the way he had when she was small. I'm sorry I doubted, she whispered against his shoulder. You had every right to question, but next time you doubt, his arms tightened. Come to me. Don't pull away. Don't test from a distance. Just ask. Will you always choose me? Every single day, for the rest of my life. That's what love is, Natasha. Not a feeling, a choice, made over and over again. Between them, Elijah stirred, mumbling in his sleep. Brother and daughter, both his, both loved, both chosen in different ways. But Natasha understood now. Being chosen first didn't make her second. It made her foundational. Natasha stood in front of her history class 3 days later with a presentation that would probably cost her points, but felt more honest than anything she'd ever created. Ms. Park had asked for a traditional family tree, 3 generations, biological lineage, cultural heritage mapped in neat branches. Natasha had made something different. This is my family tree, she began, projecting the image onto the screen. But it's not organized the way you probably expected. Instead of a traditional tree with branches spreading from biological ancestors, Natasha had created a timeline of choices. At the base, Rochelle's choice to keep her when Marcus left, to work impossible jobs, hide in supply closets, risk everything for a baby she could have given up. Next, Teho's choice to protect them instead of having them removed, to hold a 10-month-old baby who wasn't his and decide she was worth changing his entire life for. Then, her own choice at 10 years old to stand in a courtroom and declare who her real father was, despite biology saying otherwise. And finally, Elijah's place on the tree, not as a threat, but as evidence that family could be built through both biology and choice, and neither was more valid than the other. My teacher wanted me to trace my heritage, Natasha continued, aware that Ms. Park's expression was somewhere between confused and disapproving. But my heritage isn't just DNA. It's my mother's courage, my father's capacity to love someone who wasn't his by blood. It's the choice we all made to be a family when we could have walked away. A student raised their hand. But what about your real family tree, your biological grandparents? I have a biological grandfather I've never met who shares my DNA but nothing else. And I have a father who shares my last name, my home, my history, and 15 years of showing up. Natasha's voice was steady. Which one do you think matters more to who I am? The class went silent. Ms. Park cleared her throat. Ms. Kang, this doesn't really follow the assignment parameters. I know, and I accept whatever grade that earns me. Natasha looked directly at her teacher. But you asked us to explore what shaped our identity. This is my answer. Family isn't about biology. It's about who stays. She sat down to scattered applause and Ms. Park's disappointed sigh. Later, when the grade came back, a C for not following directions, Natasha didn't care. Because that evening, Taeho framed her presentation and hung it in his office, right next to the photograph from 15 years ago. At dinner, Elijah pointed at the frame excitedly. "That's us! That's our family!" "That's right," Taeho said, his hand resting on Natasha's shoulder. "Am I on the tree?" Elijah asked. "You are," Natasha confirmed. "Right here, my little brother who completes our family. Because I was born into it? Because we all chose to love you," Rochelle said gently, "just like we chose each other." Elijah seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to his food. Later, when Natasha was heading to bed, she found an envelope on her pillow. Inside, a note in Taeho's handwriting. "You got a C on the assignment, but an A+ in understanding what matters. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. Dad." Beneath his signature, he'd added something else. "P.S. The letters in my office, I'm still writing them, still documenting this journey, because 15 years later, I'm still in awe that you chose me first." Natasha pressed the note to her chest, finally understanding what she'd spent weeks doubting. Biology had given her Marcus's DNA, circumstance had brought her to Taeho's mansion, legal paperwork had made her a Kang, but love, daily, chosen, unwavering love, had made her his daughter, and that was the only heritage that mattered. She found Taeho in his office, looked at him seriously, and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me every single day, even when you forgot you had." Taeho pulled her into a hug. "Always, Natasha. That's not a choice anymore. It's just who I am." In the hallway, the family tree hung on the wall, not a chart of genetics, but a map of choices that had built something stronger than blood. Elijah ran past, chasing a toy car, yelling for his sister to play. Natasha smiled, let go of her father, and went to chase her brother, because she finally understood she wasn't competing with Elijah for their father's love. She was the one who'd taught Taeho to love in the first place, and that made her irreplaceable, not despite being chosen, because of it. You know what breaks my heart about Natasha's spiral? She had 15 years of evidence, actual physical proof that she was loved completely, and she still doubted. Not because Taeho failed her, not because he loved Elijah more, but because insecurity doesn't care about evidence. It whispers louder than facts. It takes one overheard legal conversation and twists it into proof that you're less than, that you're different, that chosen will never equal born. And here's the thing, Natasha's feelings were valid, even though they weren't based in reality. Because being adopted, even in the absolute best circumstances, sometimes comes with this quiet question that won't go away. Would they love me more if I was really theirs? Taeho kept every crayon drawing, wrote letters he never sent, spent months perfecting legal protections, held her through nightmares and negotiations and a literal custody battle. 15 years of showing up every single day. But Natasha needed to hear the words too. And that's what this final chapter teaches us, that sometimes showing isn't enough. Sometimes the people we love need us to say it out loud, even when we think it's obvious. Even when we've proven it 1,000 times.
You're not a project. You're the child who saved me. You were first. Those words from Tejo, that's what Natasha needed, not because the actions weren't there, but because doubt is a language that only truth spoken directly can silence. So here's my question for you, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this. If you were Natasha, would you have doubted too? Or do you think 15 years of consistent love should have been enough to silence the insecurity? And here's the harder one. If you're a parent, biological or adoptive, how do you make sure your kids know they're equally loved when biology creates automatic belonging for some but not others? Because this is real. There are families everywhere navigating this exact dynamic: biological kids and adopted kids, step siblings and half siblings, blended families trying to make sure everyone feels equally chosen. Drop your honest answers in the comments. Were you Team Natasha, understanding why she spiraled? Or were you frustrated with her for doubting what Tejo had proven repeatedly? And if you've lived this, either as the adopted child or the parent, what helped you feel certain about where you belonged? If this trilogy reminded you that family is built through daily choices, not genetic accidents, that the people who show up every single day are your real family, regardless of DNA, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if you want to go deeper with exclusive content, early access to new stories, behind-the-scenes breakdowns of how these narratives are crafted, and a community of people who believe chosen family is real family, join our membership. Your support keeps these stories coming and helps us explore the complicated, beautiful truth about what family really means. Because the best stories aren't fairy tales where everything is simple. They're about real people, like Natasha, like Tejo, like all of us, trying to figure out where we belong and learning that sometimes belonging isn't about blood or paperwork. It's about someone looking at you and deciding every single day, you're mine, and I'm not letting go. Tejo Kong started as the Steel King with nothing to lose. A 10-month-old baby crawled into his life and taught him what love was. A custody battle proved that biology doesn't define parenthood. And finally, a 15-year-old's doubt gave him the chance to say what he'd been showing all along. You were first. You taught me how to be a father, and that makes you irreplaceable. Natasha questioned her place for a few weeks, but she was never actually at risk of losing it. Because once you're chosen by someone like Tejo Kong, someone who loves with the fierce certainty of daily decision rather than biological accident, that choice doesn't expire. It just gets stronger with time. Until next time, remember, the family that chooses you is choosing you on purpose, and that's more powerful than any DNA test could ever be. So tell me in the comments, does biology create a different kind of love, or is chosen love actually stronger because it's intentional? Let's talk about it. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that being chosen isn't second best. It's proof that someone saw you and decided you were worth everything. Silent Speaks Story, where every story leaves a mark. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family, identity, and the choices that define us. Join our membership for exclusive content and early access. Comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one. Share this story with someone navigating adoption, blended families, and the beautiful complexity of chosen love. See you in the next story. Stay fearless. Stay chosen.